Bryn Calloway, 32, never expected a random Facebook notification to destroy her family. When her parents asked her to contribute $60,000 for her sister's college tuition, claiming financial hardship, she was ready to drain her savings to help. But just as she was about to transfer the money, an unexpected photo appeared on her feed, her parents smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower with the caption, "Best anniversary trip ever," the date stamp 2 weeks ago. Before I dive into this wild family revenge drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story of family betrayal resonates with you, smash that like button and subscribe to hear more shocking true stories about how blood isn't always thicker than water. Trust me, you won't believe how karma comes back around in this one. Growing up in suburban Boston, Bryn always believed her family was the picture of middle-class normalcy. Her parents, Richard and Marianne Calloway, worked steady jobs, he as an insurance adjuster and she as a high school administrator. They lived in a modest 4-bedroom home, took occasional vacations to the Cape, and preached financial responsibility at every opportunity. "A penny saved is a penny earned" was practically the family motto recited over dinner tables and during car rides. The mantra became so deeply ingrained in Bryn that she started saving half her allowance at age 10. Bryn's younger sister, Ellie, was different. 5 years her junior, Ellie embodied spontaneity and creative passion traits their parents seemed to simultaneously admire and worry about. While Bryn excelled in mathematics and practical subjects, Ellie threw herself into art, theater, and poetry pursuits their parents called wonderful hobbies but never career paths. Still, despite their differences, the sisters maintained a close relationship. They shared secrets, protected each other from their parents' occasional disappointment, and promised to always have each other's backs. When college applications rolled around, Bryn followed her parents' practical advice. She applied for every scholarship available, worked part-time throughout her degree, and graduated from a solid state university with minimal debt. Her business degree led to an entry-level position at a financial services firm, and through diligent work and careful money management, she steadily climbed the corporate ladder. Ellie's path diverged dramatically. After high school, she deferred college to backpack through Europe, much to their parents' visible disapproval. When she returned, she enrolled in community college courses but dropped out after a semester, claiming the environment stifled her creative voice. For the next few years, she bounced between retail jobs, art collectives, and volunteer positions at local theaters. Their parents' response to these different life choices created an undeniable pattern. When Bryn received a promotion to senior financial analyst, her father nodded approvingly and said, "That's what responsibility gets you." When Ellie announced she'd been accepted to a prestigious art program, her mother sighed and asked, "But how will you support yourself?" The contrast wasn't lost on either sister, though. They rarely discussed it directly. By 32, Bryn had established herself as a respected investment advisor. She owned a sleek condo in downtown Boston, contributed generously to her retirement accounts, and even had a substantial emergency fund, all achievements her parents proudly mentioned to friends and extended family. Meanwhile, Ellie at 27 had begun to find her footing as a graphic designer, though her income remained modest and unpredictable. Family gatherings had fallen into a predictable pattern. Their parents would praise Bryn's financial acumen while offering Ellie well-intentioned but patronizing advice about getting serious and planning for the future. Bryn often found herself in the uncomfortable position of mediator, trying to translate between her parents' practical worldview and her sister's creative aspirations. Despite these tensions, Bryn never doubted her parents' honesty or integrity. Richard and Marianne had always presented themselves as open books, fiscally conservative people who lived within their means and valued transparency above all else. They shared stories of their own early struggles, how they'd scrimped and saved for a down payment on their first home, how they'd never carried credit card debt, how they'd planned meticulously for retirement. These stories shaped Bryn's financial philosophy and reinforced her belief that her parents practiced what they preached. So, when her mother called on a Tuesday evening in early April, voice tight with what sounded like genuine anxiety, Bryn felt an immediate surge of concern. Something in her mother's tone suggested this wasn't a routine check-in. What came next would shatter the foundations of trust that had defined her family relationships for over 3 decades, setting in motion a chain of revelations that would force Bryn to question everything she thought she knew about loyalty, honesty, and the true meaning of family. The call came at 7:42 p.m. as Bryn was reviewing client portfolios in her home office. Her mother's name flashed on the screen and Bryn answered with her usual warmth, expecting their typical weekly catch-up. Instead, Marianne's voice trembled slightly as she asked, "Are you sitting down, honey? Your father and I need to discuss something important with you." Within minutes, her father joined the call, his normally confident tone replaced by something Bryn had rarely heard: vulnerability. "We wouldn't ask if we had any other option," Richard began, clearing his throat. "Your sister has been accepted to that prestigious art program at Parsons, full acceptance, but only partial scholarship." "That's amazing," Bryn exclaimed, genuinely happy for Ellie. Her sister had been talking about this program for years, though Bryn had assumed it was just another of Ellie's passing dreams. "It is," Marianne agreed, "but the tuition is substantial. $60,000 for the 2-year program even after the scholarship." A moment of silence hung between them before Richard continued, his voice strained. "We've looked at our finances from every angle. We've even considered a second mortgage, but with the housing market downturn and our retirement so close," he trailed off. Bryn's mind raced. $60,000 was no small sum, even with her substantial savings. It would significantly delay her plans to invest in a rental property. Yet the thought of her sister finally having a clear path forward, a chance to transform her undeniable talent into a stable career, felt undeniably right. "We wouldn't ask," Marianne interjected, "but your financial situation is so much more flexible than ours. With retirement just 5 years away and the medical expenses from your father's knee surgery last year. And the roof repairs," Richard added quickly. "Don't forget, we had to replace the entire eastern section after that terrible storm." Bryn had heard about these expenses in passing, but hadn't realized they had created such financial strain. Her parents had always been private about the specifics of their finances, teaching by example rather than explicit disclosure. Still, something about the conversation felt slightly off, a hesitation in their voices perhaps, or the carefully constructed narrative of hardship that seemed almost rehearsed. "Have you talked to Ellie about this?" Bryn asked, trying to organize her thoughts. "Not yet," Marianne admitted. "We didn't want to get her hopes up if there wasn't a solution. You know how sensitive she can be about money matters." That was true enough. Ellie had always struggled with what she called the soul-crushing materialism of financial discussions. Previous attempts to help her create a budget had ended in tears and accusations that no one understood the artistic temperament. "We thought," Richard continued, "that if you could help with this investment in her future, it might be better coming from you anyway. She looks up to you, Bryn. Your support would mean even more than the money itself." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Her parents outlined the program's merits, emphasized how this opportunity could finally give Ellie the structure and credentials she needed, and repeatedly assured Bryn that they wouldn't ask if they had any alternative. By the call's end, Bryn had tentatively agreed to think about it, promising to review her finances and get back to them within the week. After hanging up, Bryn sat motionless at her desk. The practical side of her brain, the investment advisor who helped clients make rational decisions daily, screamed caution. This was an enormous financial commitment, with no guaranteed return. Yet another part of her, the loving sister who had always felt a responsibility to look out for Ellie, saw the potential transformation this opportunity might bring. She opened her financial planning spreadsheet and began running scenarios. If she liquidated her non-retirement investments and postponed her property purchase plans, she could manage it without completely derailing her long-term goals. It would be tight but doable. By midnight, she had convinced herself this was the right move, a concrete way to support her sister's dreams while honoring the family values of mutual support her parents had instilled. The next morning, Bryn called her parents back. "I'll do it," she said firmly. For Ellie, the relief in their voices was palpable. They showered her with gratitude, calling her generous, selfless, the embodiment of family loyalty. Richard even choked up slightly, saying, "This is what family is all about, Bryn. Sacrificing for each other when it matters most." Bryn scheduled the fund transfers for the following Monday, allowing time for her investments to liquidate. She felt a complex mixture of emotions, concern about the financial setback, excitement for Ellie's opportunity, and a warm glow of familial duty fulfilled. What she didn't yet feel was suspicion. That would come 3 days later, triggered by a casual scroll through her Facebook feed while waiting for her morning coffee to brew. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear as Bryn stood in her kitchen scrolling through Facebook while her coffee machine gurgled behind her. It was a mindless routine one she performed daily before diving into work emails. She barely registered the familiar faces and updates until a particular photo stopped her mid-scroll. There, grinning widely against a backdrop of the Eiffel Tower, stood her parents. Richard wore a navy blazer she'd never seen before, and Marianne sported designer sunglasses that caught the Parisian sunlight. The caption read, "Best anniversary trip ever. 30 years deserves something special. Number bucket list, number Paris, number no regrets." The timestamp indicated it had been posted by her mother's cousin Linda, who had apparently been tagged in the album. The date just 2 weeks ago, Bryn blinked, certain she was misinterpreting something. Her parents hadn't mentioned a trip to France, not before, during, or after their supposed financial hardship conversation. She zoomed in on the photo, studying the details. Her mother wore a necklace that appeared to be new, a delicate gold piece that definitely wasn't from her usual modest jewelry collection. Their clothes looked expensive, their faces relaxed and carefree, hardly the expression of a couple drowning in medical bills and home repairs. With growing unease, Bryn clicked through to the full album. Photo after photo documented what was clearly a luxury vacation. Her parents enjoying wine tastings in Bordeaux, staying at a chateau in the Loire Valley, shopping along the Champs-Élysées. One photo showed her father proudly holding up a receipt from a Michelin-starred restaurant captioned, "Worth every euro." The coffee machine beeped, but Bryn barely noticed. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued investigating, moving from Facebook to Instagram, where she found more evidence. Her mother had created a private account that Bryn had never known about, filled with travel photos, not just from France, but from trips to Tuscany last fall and the Amalfi Coast the year before. How had she missed this? The answer became clear as she dug deeper. Her parents had carefully compartmentalized their social media presence, creating separate accounts for different audiences. Family members like cousin Linda, who had no connection to Bryn or Ellie, saw the unfiltered vacation posts. Meanwhile, the accounts her parents had connected with their daughters showed only modest local activities and occasional complaints about rising costs and retirement concerns. The systematic deception was breathtaking. Bryn's mind raced back through conversations from the past few years, recalling offhand comments about tight budgets and careful planning that had always reinforced her image of her parents as frugal, practical people. Now, each memory took on a sinister new light. With a sudden thought, Bryn logged into her online banking portal. The transfer for Ellie's tuition was scheduled for Monday morning, $60,000. That would drain nearly all her non-retirement savings. Her finger hovered over the cancel transaction button, but she hesitated. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about Ellie, too. Did her sister know about their parents' duplicity? Was she an unwitting pawn in this deception, or a willing participant? The thought made Bryn's stomach churn. She needed more information before confronting anyone. With methodical precision born from years of financial analysis, Bryn began documenting everything she found. She took screenshots of the vacation photos, noting dates and estimated costs. She compiled a timeline of her parents' claimed financial hardships against their apparent luxury expenditures. She even researched the properties they had stayed in, finding nightly rates that made her wince. By noon, the evidence was undeniable. Her parents' modest lifestyle, the one they had preached about and seemingly modeled throughout her childhood, was a carefully constructed facade. Behind it lay a pattern of lavish spending and deliberate deception that spanned at least several years. The question of why haunted her most. Why maintain the pretense of financial struggle? Why ask for money they clearly didn't need? Why risk their relationship with their daughter over what seemed to be, for them, an unnecessary sum? As the shock began to crystallize into anger, Bryn realized she needed perspective from someone who knew her family but wouldn't be emotionally compromised by the revelation. She called her oldest friend Megan, who had known the Calloway family since childhood. "I need to show you something," Bryn said without preamble when Megan answered. "And I need you to tell me if I'm overreacting." They met at a quiet cafe an hour later. As Megan scrolled through the evidence on Bryn's laptop, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to outrage. I don't even have words," Megan finally said, pushing the laptop back across the table. "It's not just that they lied about the money, Bryn. It's the planning that went into this. The separate accounts, the careful editing of what you and Ellie could see versus what others saw. That's calculated." Bryn nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "What do I do now? I'm supposed to transfer the money on Monday." Megan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "First, cancel that transfer. Then decide how you want to handle this. But remember, you're not the one who broke trust here. Whatever happens next is on them, not you." As Bryn walked home, her initial shock hardened into resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate betrayal of everything she thought her family stood for. And now she had a decision to make, not just about the money, but about what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted with the people who had raised her to value honesty above all else, while systematically deceiving her. The weekend passed in a blur of investigation and emotional turbulence. Bryn canceled the money transfer first thing Saturday morning, then threw herself into uncovering the full extent of her parents' deception. What had begun as a shocking discovery quickly evolved into something that felt like a forensic audit of her entire family history. She started with financial records. As an investment advisor, Bryn had access to tools and databases that most people didn't. While she couldn't directly access her parents' accounts that would be both unethical and illegal, she could piece together public information in revealing ways. Property records showed that her parents had paid off their mortgage 5 years ago, something they'd never mentioned. Instead, they'd continued to reference mortgage payments in family conversations, creating the impression of ongoing financial obligations. Records also revealed they owned a vacation property in coastal Maine purchased 3 years ago under an LLC with a name that cleverly disguised their connection, RM Retirement Holdings. The property had cost $875,000. "Retirement," Bryn muttered bitterly as she stared at the screen. At least they weren't lying about planning for that. Social media continued to yield damning evidence. Through methodical searching and leveraging connections with distant relatives, Bryn uncovered photos of her parents at high-end restaurants, exclusive golf clubs, and on various luxury vacations, not just to France but to New Zealand, Japan, and a safari in Tanzania, all while claiming they couldn't afford to replace their aging refrigerator or repair their troublesome car. I know this story is getting wild, and trust me, it's about to get even crazier. The betrayal I uncovered was deeper than I ever imagined. Has anyone else discovered shocking family secrets that turned your world upside down? I read all your comments and would love to hear your stories. Hit the like button if you're as shocked as I was. Subscribe for more unbelievable truth stories, and keep watching to see exactly how I turn the tables on my parents' deception. The karma that's coming will leave you speechless. By Sunday afternoon, Bryn had compiled a comprehensive dossier that painted a clear picture her parents lived a double life. To their daughters, they presented themselves as fiscally conservative, even struggling at times. To everyone else, friends, extended family, colleagues, they flaunted their wealth and indulged in luxuries without restraint. But the most painful discovery came through a phone call with Aunt Judith, her mother's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years, a rift Bryn had always been told stemmed from irreconcilable differences after their grandmother's death. On a hunch, she reached out. "Aunt Judith, it's Bryn. I hope I'm not disturbing you." The silence on the other end lasted so long that Bryn thought the call had dropped. Then a cautious voice, "Bryn, I didn't expect to ever hear from you. I know, and I'm sorry. I recently learned some things that made me question, well, a lot of what I've been told over the years." Another pause. "You found out about the money, didn't you?" The conversation that followed revealed the final devastating piece of the puzzle. According to Judith, their grandmother had left a substantial inheritance, over $2 million, to be divided equally between Marianne and Judith. But Richard and Marianne had convinced the elderly woman to change her will in her final months, redirecting the entire amount to themselves and cutting Judith out completely. "They told her I had gambling problems, that I'd waste the money," Judith explained, her voice thick with old pain. "I've never even played the lottery, Bryn. But your father presented himself as a financial expert who would protect the family legacy. By the time I discovered what had happened, the will had been changed and notarized. I couldn't afford the legal battle to contest it." This explained both the estrangement and the sudden increase in her parents' lifestyle about 6 years ago, an improvement they had attributed to careful investing and disciplined saving. "Why didn't you tell us, me, or Ellie?" Bryn asked. "I tried once. I called your house about a year after it happened. Your father answered and threatened a restraining order if I ever contacted you girls. Said he'd tell you I was mentally unstable, desperate for money. I believed him. He can be very convincing." The conversation left Bryn shaken but resolute. The betrayal extended beyond simple financial deception. It had fractured family bonds and rewritten relationships based on calculated lies. The parents she thought she knew, the ones who had shaped her values and worldview, were masterful manipulators who had constructed an elaborate fiction to control not just money, but the narrative of their entire family. By Sunday evening, Bryn's anger had crystallized into a clear plan. This wasn't just about the $60,000 they'd tried to extract from her. It was about justice for herself, for Ellie, for Aunt Judith, and perhaps others she didn't even know about yet. The question wasn't whether to confront her parents, but how to do it in a way that would force accountability without giving them room to spin more lies. She thought about Ellie, still unaware of what was happening. Bryn had avoided contacting her sister all weekend, unsure of what to say or how much Ellie might already know. But she couldn't put it off any longer. If her parents reached out to Ellie before Bryn did, they might craft a narrative that painted Bryn as the villain, the selfish daughter who reneged on a promise to help her sister. With hands that trembled slightly, Bryn dialed Ellie's number. When her sister's cheerful voice answered, Bryn took a deep breath and said, "Ellie, we need to talk. It's about Mom and Dad, and it can't wait. Are you sitting down?" The conversation that followed would forever change the sisters' understanding of their family and set the stage for a confrontation neither of them could have imagined even a week earlier. Ellie's apartment was exactly what Bryn expected, a small, vibrant space in Cambridge filled with half-finished art projects, mismatched furniture rescued from curbs and thrift stores, and walls covered in a collage of postcards, sketches, and photographs. But the expression on her sister's face as Bryn methodically presented the evidence was something she had never seen before. A cold, focused anger that transformed her usually animated features into something almost unrecognizable. "Show me everything again," Ellie said, for the third time, her voice unnaturally flat. The timeline specifically. Bryn reopened the spreadsheet she'd created, which mapped their parents' claimed financial hardships against their actual expenditures. "See here, 3 months ago, Mom told you they couldn't help with your rent when your roommate moved out because they were struggling to cover Dad's medical bills. That same week, they were staying at a 5-star resort in Santorini. The bill for just the hotel was over $7,000. Ellie nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the screen as if physical contact might make the betrayal more comprehensible. "And 2 years ago when my car broke down and I needed $1,200 for repairs, they said they had to dip into their emergency fund just to send you $400. Bryn completed the thought. Meanwhile, they had just returned from a wine tour through Napa Valley, where Dad bought a case of Cabernet for $3,600. The sisters sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decades of manipulation pressing down on them. Finally, Ellie looked up, her eyes clear and determined. "They were never going to pay for Parsons, were they? This was all just a scheme to get money from you." It wasn't a question, but Bryn answered anyway. "No, I don't think they were. But here's what I can't figure out why. They clearly don't need the money. So why go through such an elaborate deception?" Ellie stood abruptly and paced the small living room, her creative energy channeling into intense movement. "Control," she said finally. "It's always been about control. Think about it, Bryn. You followed their script perfectly. Practical degree, stable job, careful saving. I've been the disappointment, the one who never fit their mold. What better way to reinforce their narrative than to make me dependent on your financial sacrifice?" The insight hit Bryn with stunning clarity. This wasn't just about money. It was about maintaining the family dynamic they had carefully constructed, Bryn as the responsible achiever, Ellie as the struggling creative, and themselves as the wise, frugal parents whose principles had produced one successful daughter, despite the other's limitations. "If I'd given you the money," Bryn said slowly, "they would have taken credit for raising such a generous, selfless daughter, while simultaneously reinforcing the idea that you couldn't succeed without family bailouts. And I would have been $60,000 poorer, making me less likely to take financial risks or challenge their wisdom in the future." Ellie collapsed back onto the couch, pulling her knees to her chest in a defensive posture reminiscent of her teenage years. "So, what do we do now? Confront them?" Eventually, Bryn nodded. "But not before we understand the full picture. I spoke with Aunt Judith yesterday." Ellie's eyes widened. "Mom's unstable sister, the one who supposedly tried to steal Grandma's jewelry after the funeral, that's what they told us. The reality is quite different." Bryn recounted the conversation with their aunt watching, as Ellie's expression shifted from skepticism to horror. $2 million, Ellie whispered when Bryn finished. "They stole $2 million from Grandma and Aunt Judith, then painted Judith as a villain to keep us from ever questioning their version of events." She pressed her palms against her eyes. How many other relationships have they poisoned with lies? How many family members have we lost because of them? The question hung in the air, unanswerable yet haunting. Both sisters were now excavating memories, re-examining interactions and estrangements through this new disturbing lens. "I've been thinking about what to do," Bryn said, finally pulling out a notebook filled with her precise handwriting. "A simple confrontation won't work. They're too skilled at manipulation. If we accuse them directly, they'll spin it, deflect, perhaps even turn us against each other somehow. We need to be strategic." Ellie leaned forward, her artistic mind already visualizing possibilities. "What are you thinking?" "Something they won't expect," Bryn replied, a plan crystallizing as she spoke. "We use their own tactics against them, but with one crucial difference: we'll have truth on our side." Over the next 4 hours, the sisters crafted a strategy that leveraged their complementary strengths. Bryn's financial acumen and methodical planning, paired with Ellie's creative thinking and performance background. They would need both skill sets to outmaneuver the parents who had spent decades perfecting the art of deception. "Are you sure about your part?" Bryn asked as they finalized the details. "You'll need to be completely convincing." Ellie's smile held no warmth. "I've been acting my whole life, pretending to be the daughter they wanted, hiding my resentment when they dismissed my dreams, faking gratitude for their sacrifices. This will be my finest performance yet." As night fell, the sisters solidified their alliance with a solemn promise to see their plan through, regardless of the emotional cost. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming their narrative, exposing long-buried truths, and perhaps most importantly, ensuring their parents could never manipulate anyone in their family again. "One thing still bothers me," Ellie said as Bryn prepared to leave. "What about Parsons? That part wasn't a lie. I really did get accepted, and I really do need the tuition money." Bryn paused at the door, then turned back with a determined expression. "Let me worry about that. Whatever happens with Mom and Dad, I promise you'll get your chance at Parsons. But first, we have a family meeting to arrange." As she drove home through the quiet Boston streets, Bryn felt an unfamiliar emotion cutting through her anger and heard a sense of liberation. For the first time, she was seeing her parents clearly without the distorting lens of childhood loyalty and ingrained respect. The revelation was painful, but necessary. And the justice she and Ellie were about to pursue would reshape their family forever. The following Saturday, Bryn arrived at her parents' house precisely at noon, just as planned. She parked her car behind Ellie's beat-up Honda in the driveway of the colonial-style home where they'd grown up. From the outside, the house looked exactly as it always had, well-maintained but modest, projecting the image of sensible middle-class comfort that her parents had cultivated so carefully. How strange, Bryn thought, that a place so familiar could suddenly feel like the scene of a crime. She checked her phone one last time before exiting the car. Everything was in place. Aunt Judith was standing by for a video call. The family lawyer Bryn had consulted had provided clear guidance on their legal options, and most importantly, the documents were organized in the leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Inside, Ellie had already arrived and was playing her role perfectly. Seated across from their parents in the living room, she looked appropriately enthusiastic about the supposed tuition assistance, peppering them with grateful questions about enrollment deadlines and housing options. "Bryn," her mother exclaimed, rising to embrace her. "We were just telling Ellie the wonderful news about how you're helping with her tuition. She's absolutely over the moon." Bryn accepted the hug stiffly, noting the expensive new watch on her mother's wrist and the subtle scent of high-end perfume, little luxuries that seemed especially obscene now that she understood their context. "Before we get into all that," Bryn said, carefully setting her portfolio on the coffee table, "I thought we might look through some family photos. I've been feeling nostalgic lately." Richard frowned slightly, clearly confused by this deviation from the expected script. Photos. I thought we were here to discuss Ellie's enrollment details. We will, Bryn assured him, her tone pleasantly neutral as she withdrew a tablet from her bag. But I found some really interesting pictures recently that I'd love your perspective on. Without waiting for a response, she turned on the tablet and projected its screen onto the large TV mounted on the living room wall, a feature her parents had installed for watching sports, but rarely used otherwise. The first image appeared Richard and Marianne smiling broadly in front of the Eiffel Tower. "This is a lovely shot," Bryn commented, watching their expressions carefully. "When was this trip? I don't remember you mentioning it." The color drained from her mother's face. Richard's eyes darted to Marianne, then back to the screen. "Oh, that," he said with forced casualness. "Just a quick anniversary getaway, nothing extravagant. We found an excellent deal on flights." "How nice," Bryn nodded, swiping to the next photo, her parents boarding a private yacht on the French Riviera. "And this one, another excellent deal, I presume, Bryn," her mother interrupted, voice tight with sudden anxiety. "What is this about?" "I'm just curious about your recent travels," Bryn replied, continuing to swipe through the damning collection of luxury vacation photos. "Especially since you told me last week that you couldn't afford Ellie's tuition because of, what was it, again? Medical bills? Roof repairs? Both very expensive, I'm sure." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard straightened, shifting into the authoritative posture he had used throughout their childhood when delivering lectures about responsibility. "I don't appreciate this tone, Bryn. If you had questions about our finances, you could have asked directly instead of, whatever this performance is." "Performance," Ellie echoed, dropping her pretense of ignorance. "That's an interesting word choice, Dad. Considering the performance you and Mom have been putting on for, our entire lives." Marianne's hand fluttered to her throat, a gesture of distress that once would have immediately softened Bryn's approach. Now she recognized it as another calculated move in her mother's extensive repertoire of manipulation tactics. "Girls, there's clearly been some misunderstanding." Marianne began, her voice taking on the soothing quality she used when mediating family disagreements. "Your father and I have always been transparent with you about." "Stop," Bryn interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "Just stop. We know everything." She turned to the portfolio on the table and began methodically laying out documents, property records for the main vacation home, bank statements showing regular deposits of rental income from an apartment building in Providence, apparently owned receipts from luxury purchases, and finally a copy of their grandmother's original will alongside documentation of the changes made shortly before her death. "We spoke to Aunt Judith," Ellie added, watching as her mother's face contorted in genuine shock. "She had quite a different story about Grandma's inheritance than the one you told us." Richard's demeanor changed instantly, his conciliatory expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. "You had no right to contact her. She's unstable, manipulative. Projection much, Dad?" Ellie shot back, years of suppressed frustration finally breaking through. "The only manipulative people in this family are sitting right across from me." For nearly an hour, the confrontation unfolded like a courtroom drama. Bryn and Ellie presented their evidence piece by piece, countering each parental denial and deflection with documented facts. When Richard claimed the vacation home was a recent investment opportunity, Bryn produced records showing they had owned it for years. When Marianne suggested Aunt Judith was lying about the inheritance to cause family strife, Ellie played a recording of their conversation, capturing Judith's genuine pain and the consistency of her account. Gradually, their parents' defenses crumbled. Denial gave way to justification, then to anger, and finally to a chilling rationalization that revealed the true extent of their moral bankruptcy. "We earned everything we have," Richard insisted, his voice rising. "We worked hard all our lives. Why shouldn't we enjoy the fruits of our labor?" "Enjoy them all you want," Bryn responded coolly. But why lie to us? Why pretend to struggle financially while living a secret life of luxury? Why ask me for $60? 000. You clearly don't need. A tense silence filled the room before Marianne answered, her voice unnervingly calm. Because you needed to learn responsibility, both of you. Bryn, you've always been so careful with money too. Careful sometimes. We thought if you believed we were in genuine need, you'd finally use those savings you've been hoarding for something meaningful. And Ellie, she turned to her younger daughter, you needed to understand that your choices have consequences. That sometimes you have to depend on family charity because of your impractical pursuits. The casual cruelty of the statement hung in the air. Ellie's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Bryn placed a steadying hand on her sister's arm. Let me make sure I understand, Bryn said, her professional analyst's voice taking over. You lied about needing money for Ellie's tuition to teach me a lesson about generosity. And simultaneously, you were teaching Ellie that her educational goals aren't worth supporting directly, that she should be grateful for whatever handouts she receives. All while you spend tens of thousands on luxury vacations you hide from us. Richard stood abruptly, his authoritative mask slipping to reveal naked defensiveness. You're twisting everything as usual. We've always supported both of you. No, Ellie interrupted, her voice surprisingly calm. You've always supported the versions of us that fit your narrative. Bryn, the responsible saver who needs to loosen the purse strings. Ellie, the flighty artist who needs tough love. But we're not characters in your story. We're your daughters. And as your daughters, Bryn continued seamlessly, we deserve the truth. About everything. Starting with Grandma's inheritance and what really happened with Aunt Judith. What followed was the most honest conversation the Calloway family had ever experienced. Under the weight of irrefutable evidence, Richard and Marianne gradually abandoned their carefully constructed facade. They admitted to manipulating their mother-in-law into changing her will, to deliberately estranging Judith with false accusations, and to maintaining a secret life of luxury while presenting a false image of middle-class constraint to their daughters. We did what we thought was best, Marianne insisted weakly as the confessions wound down. We wanted you both to develop good values, not to expect handouts or easy money. By lying, Bryn asked incredulously. By manipulating everyone around you, those are the values you wanted to instill. No satisfactory answer came. As the afternoon stretched into evening, it became increasingly clear that their parents were incapable of truly recognizing the damage they had caused. They could acknowledge the facts when confronted with evidence, but couldn't or wouldn't understand the deeper betrayal of trust that their daughters felt. As the confrontation reached its natural conclusion, Bryn delivered the final blow they had planned. We're not asking for your money, she said firmly, but we are demanding honesty from this point forward. And as a first step toward making amends, here's what's going to happen. You will contact Aunt Judith and arrange to pay her the inheritance she was cheated out of, plus reasonable interest. Richard began to protest, but Bryn continued undeterred. If you refuse, we've prepared documentation for the probate court suggesting fraud in Grandma's will changes. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. Is that really a legal battle you want to face? The threat was calculated. The sisters' lawyer had confirmed that while a case might be difficult to prove after so many years, the publicity alone would shatter their parents' carefully cultivated social image. And second, Ellie added, you will personally fund my tuition at Parsons. Not as a loan, not as a controlling mechanism, but as a belated inheritance from the grandmother whose legacy you stole. The parents exchanged a long look, communicating silently in the way of couples who have shared decades together. Finally, Richard nodded stiffly. We'll need time to liquidate some investments, he said, his voice devoid of its usual confidence. Take all the time you need, Bryn replied coolly. but we'll need the agreement in writing. Today, as the sisters left their parents' house that evening, legal agreement in hand, a weight seemed to lift from their shoulders. The family they had known was irrevocably changed, the foundation of trust, shattered beyond repair. Yet somehow walking to their cars together under the darkening sky, they felt lighter than they had in years. "What now?" Ellie asked quietly as they reached the driveway. Bryn looked at her sister, really looked at her perhaps for the first time, seeing her not as the flighty younger sibling their parents had labeled her, but as the strong, perceptive woman she had become. "Now, we rebuild," she said simply. "Not with them necessarily, but with each other, with Aunt Judith, with truth." Ellie nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Truth," she repeated. What a concept. As they drove away from the house that had never been the simple family home they'd believed it to be, both sisters understood that the confrontation wasn't really an ending. It was in many ways a beginning, the first chapter of a family story finally being told honestly. 6 months later, Bryn sat in the audience of a small gallery in Manhattan's Chelsea district, watching as Ellie confidently guided visitors through her first exhibition, a series of mixed media pieces exploring themes of deception, authenticity, and familial bonds. The show, titled Facades, had already received positive reviews from several art blogs, with critics noting the emotional depth and technical skill evident in the work. The promised tuition money had indeed materialized, transferred directly to Parsons without strings attached. Their parents had also reached a settlement with Aunt Judith, who now regularly joined the sisters for Sunday brunches and holiday celebrations. The relationship with Richard and Marianne remained strained, but civil monthly phone calls and occasional emails that carefully avoided any topics deeper than weather and current events. "She's flourishing," Judith remarked, settling into the chair beside Bryn and nodding toward Ellie, who was animatedly explaining her artistic process to an attentive collector. "She is," Bryn agreed, feeling a surge of pride. Turns out all she needed was honest support, not manipulation disguised as tough love. As the evening wound down and the gallery began to empty, Ellie joined them, cheeks flushed with excitement. "2 sales," she announced triumphantly, "and the gallery owner wants to discuss including my work in their winter showcase." The 3 women celebrated over late dinner at a nearby restaurant, sharing stories and gradually rebuilding the family connections that deception had severed. When Judith excused herself to catch her train back to Boston, the sisters lingered over coffee. "I've been thinking," Ellie said thoughtfully. "Despite everything, the lies, the manipulation, the years of unnecessary struggle, I'm almost grateful for what happened. Not for what they did," she clarified quickly, "but for the truth it forced into the open." Bryn considered this, turning her coffee cup slowly between her palms. "I know what you mean. There's something liberating about finally seeing things clearly, even when the clarity reveals something painful." "Exactly. And look at us now. I'm pursuing my dreams without apology. You're reconnecting with the more spontaneous side of yourself, and we both understand the value of honest relationships in a way we might never have otherwise." It wasn't a perfect resolution. The parents they had believed in were gone, replaced by complicated, flawed individuals with whom they might never fully reconcile. Trust, once shattered, could not be seamlessly restored. But in its place had grown something perhaps more valuable: authentic connection based on truth rather than comforting illusions. As they walked together through the vibrant city streets, Bryn reflected that family, real family, wasn't defined by blood or shared history alone, but by the willingness to see each other honestly and love each other anyway. It was a lesson, hard won, but worth the price. I hope you enjoyed my family revenge story. I'd love to know if you've ever discovered a betrayal that ultimately led to positive change in your life. Leave a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more authentic stories about family dynamics, healing, and personal growth. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the painful truth is better than a comfortable lie. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, true family supports each other with honesty, not manipulation.